They tell you history is complex. They tell you the fall of empires, Rome, the French monarchy, the Spanish Golden Age, was due to barbarians, moral decay, or just bad luck. They paint it as a slow, inevitable decline. But what if that's a lie? What if the real mechanism of imperial collapse is blindingly simple and horrifyingly predictable? It's not the rich who start revolutions. The wealthy have loopholes. They have offshore accounts. It's not the destitute. The truly poor are too focused on survival. It's the middle class, the backbone, the earners, the people who pay into the system. And history proves, time and again, that when the state begins to eat its own productive base, when it weaponizes taxation to fund its own hidden insolvency, that middle class rages. The French farmer wasn't ruined by a drought. He was ruined by the taille, a tax that could not be escaped. The Roman citizen didn't fall to the Goths. He fell to the tributum, a crushing, endless burden that made work pointless. And today, you feel it, don't you? That squeeze, that feeling of running faster just to stay in the same place. Your paycheck is the target. Bracket creep, phantom inflation, taxes funding something you can't see. We are watching an empire implode in real time. This isn't about what taxes pay for, it's about what the taxes are hiding. Stop trusting the narrative. Hit that subscribe button right now because we're diving into the unfiltered truth. And tell me, down in the comments, where are you watching from? Are you feeling the squeeze yet? Let's be clear, every great power begins the same way, with a strong, productive core and a low-tax environment that incentivizes work and trade. But then, the parasite finds its host, the Roman Empire, the trap of debt and devaluation. By the 3rd century AD, the Roman economy was a fiscal disaster. Why? Endless, costly wars funded by debt, not honest taxation. To pay the soldiers and service the debt, what did the emperors do? They debased the currency. They clipped the silver and gold out of the denarius, replacing it with base metals. It was the ancient world's version of quantitative easing. The result? Skyrocketing inflation. Merchants raised prices, but the government's tax assessors refused to keep up. The fixed land tax, the tributum, stopped covering the state's actual costs. So the emperors did the only thing they could. They stopped trying to tax the wealthy, who had influence and connections, and instead created new impossible taxes targeting productivity. Taxes on mills, on transport, on professions. The incentive to produce vanished. Farmers abandoned their land. Craftsmen closed their shops. Sound familiar? Today, it's not coin clipping. It's the Federal Reserve balance sheet exploding from $900 billion to nearly $9 trillion in 15 years. The result is the same. The hidden tax of inflation devours savings, and governments, now addicted to deficits, come back for the visible tax on your wages. The French Ancien Régime, taxation for appearance. Fast forward to 1789. The French monarchy was ostensibly wealthy, yet the treasury was bankrupt. The deficit was enormous, mainly because of the American War of Independence, another foreign debt binge. But here's the key. The nobility and the clergy, the wealthiest segments, were largely exempt from the most crushing taxes, especially the taille, a tax on income and land. Who paid it? The third estate, the burgeoning middle class, the professionals, the small landowners. This class was productive, educated, and critically needed the state to function. The taxes weren't even covering essential services. They were covering the enormous interest payments on state debt and the lavish lifestyle of Versailles. When the state's primary function becomes servicing debt and subsidizing the politically powerful, the productive class realizes their labor is solely for extraction. They are no longer citizens, they are livestock. Sound familiar? Look at the corporate welfare and bailout culture of 2008 or 2020. The losses of the powerful are socialized, put onto the public ledger, and you, the middle-class taxpayer, are the cleanup crew. The modern parallel, the illusion of solvency. The consistent pattern is this. Empires create a hidden, non-taxable sphere of wealth or debt, debased currency, tax-exempt nobility, or today, complex financial instruments. When this hidden sphere spirals out of control, the state is forced to harvest the one thing it can't hide, middle-class income. In a healthy system, taxes fund public goods. In an imploding empire, taxes are the cover charge for the elite's insolvency. Today, we have the highest concentration of wealth in decades. Yet, sovereign debt globally is at all-time highs. Inflation is rampant. And what is the political solution? More taxes on the middle and upper middle class, with talk of wealth taxes that are impossible to structure effectively without driving capital out, leaving the salaried worker as the easiest target. The empires of the past used coin clipping and tax farming. We use something far more insidious, far less understood, and exponentially larger, something that allows trillions in wealth to be extracted without ever touching a tax ledger. Sound familiar? If you think the problem is just government spending, you're looking at the wrong ledger. The real cancer is the system built to launder the debt before it gets to the government. All these historical collapses share a common, devastating precondition. The sovereign was functionally bankrupt years before the revolt or the invasion. They just had a clever way of hiding the ledger. In 2025, that clever way is not a royal decree or a debased coin. It's a mechanism so vast, so intentionally complex, that it operates in a shadow realm where laws don't apply, regulators are paid to look away, and taxes are optional. I am talking about the derivatives market and the shadow banking system. For years, the official narrative has been that derivatives are tools for managing risk. That's a beautiful lie. They are instruments of leveraged, untaxed extraction. They allow institutions, the new nobility, to make enormous bets on the future value of assets, debts, and even other bets, without ever putting the full capital up front. Think of it this way. In the real economy, if you make $100, the government taxes $30. In the shadow banking system, you can use derivatives to control $10,000 worth of assets with only $100 in cash. The profit on that $10,000, a profit that should be taxed, is often funneled through complex, off-balance sheet vehicles. This creates a vast, untaxed reservoir of wealth for the elite. But here's the twist. This system is inherently unstable. When those bets, those trillions in unregulated leveraged wagers, inevitably go bad, they don't simply vanish. They create a black hole of liability that is too big to fail. What happens next is the secret mechanism of the modern tax trap. The central bank, the state, steps in to stabilize the system, but in reality they are absorbing the parasitic losses. They issue new debt, they print new money, and they create new mechanisms to secretly socialize that debt. This is the ultimate con. The middle class is forced to pay higher visible taxes to cover the invisible losses generated by the untaxed gambling of the elite. The money doesn't go to healthcare or schools. It goes to service the debt created by the shadow banking system's engineered failures. And the man who presided over the system's exponential deadly growth in the 1990s, the one who famously declared that derivatives were too complex to regulate, the very one who, despite the evidence, ensured this mechanism of systemic theft was enshrined in law, you won't believe the name behind the push that made this financial time bomb legal. The receipt is wilder than you think. Welcome to the rabbit hole. We are going to simplify the most complex financial architecture ever built, the derivatives market, the illusion of risk management. A derivative is a financial contract that derives its value from an underlying asset, like a stock, a bond, or even the weather. They started innocently enough. A farmer uses a futures contract to lock in the price of corn, minimizing risk. That's good. But the vast majority of derivatives, the trillions in the shadow system, are over-the-counter, OTC contracts. This means they are private, custom-made deals between two banks, completely outside the regulated exchange system. They are the financial equivalent of a back-alley poker game with an infinite pot. The sheer scale is the first shocking number you need to internalize. The nominal value of the global derivatives market is estimated to be over $600 trillion. That's roughly 7 times the entire world's GDP. 7 times. This is not real money, it's an ocean of exposure. The shadow bank's sleight of hand? The shadow banking system is a network of non-bank financial institutions, hedge funds, money market funds, specialized investment vehicles, that operate like banks but are free from bank regulations, especially capital and liquidity rules. Here's how they enable the tax trap. Leverage for greed. Shadow banks use derivatives, like credit default swaps, CDS, or complex swaptions, to take on massive leverage. They can borrow at near zero rates. Moral hazard enshrined. When these leveraged bets pay off, the private institution keeps the vast untaxed profits. But when they fail, as they did catastrophically in 2008 with mortgage-backed securities, MBS and CDS, the damage is so immense it threatens the entire global financial structure. This is the definition of moral hazard. The benefits are private, the costs are public. Sovereign debt laundering. This is the core mechanism of the big reveal. When a major shadow bank or too big to fail institution collapses, the government cannot let it fail. So, the central bank steps in with mechanisms like quantitative easing, QE, and central bank liquidity swaps. They pump liquidity, newly created money, into the system to absorb the losses. These losses are now socialized. They don't appear as a direct, visible bailout. They appear as a massive, sudden increase in the sovereign debt or balance sheet expansion at the central bank. Quantifying the engineered collapse. Let's look at the numbers, the receipts, that prove the system's parasitic nature. Shocking number 1, the bailout scale. The 2008 financial crisis saw the Federal Reserve and U.S. Treasury commit an estimated $16.8 trillion to bailouts and loan guarantees for the financial system. That's more than a year of U.S. GDP at the time. This was the price paid by the public to clean up the shadow banking mess. Shocking number 2, untaxed wealth. Before the 2017 U.S. tax cuts, the average corporate income tax rate was around 35%. However, many megabanks and financial entities utilizing complex derivative and offshore structures effectively paid tax rates in the single digits, sometimes even zero. That's productive wealth that was never captured by the state. Shocking number 3, the velocity of debt. From 2008 to 2024, the U.S. national debt surged by over 200%, from about $10 trillion to over $34 trillion. While some is justified spending, a substantial portion is the permanent absorption of systemic liabilities generated by the shadow banking apparatus. Shocking number 4, the central bank lifeline. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet, which holds many of the assets and liabilities absorbed during crises, grew by an astonishing 860% from the start of the 2008 crisis to its peak expansion in 2022. This is the monetary representation of the nationalization of private banking risk. Shocking number 5, the great wealth transfer. The bottom 50% of Americans saw their share of the nation's wealth hover around 2.5% in 2023, while the top 1% captured an estimated 30%. The parasitic finance system is the engine that drives this grotesque inequality, forcing governments to constantly seek new tax revenues from the stagnant middle class to try and placate a furious public. The engineered illusion. The language used is crucial. Terms like liquidity crunch, systemic risk, and contagion are intentionally opaque. They are designed to create an illusion that a mysterious, uncontrollable force requires immediate, unprecedented state intervention. But the reality is that the financial elite engineered a risk-free profit system. They take all the upside, and when the inevitable collapse happens, they simply transfer the loss to the sovereign. The government, now faced with a multi-trillion-dollar hole, has 2 options: massive, visible debt default, which causes revolt, or slowly but surely increase the tax burden on the middle class, the earners who cannot hide their income. The result is the ultimate engineered collapse of the public trust. Your taxes are now paying for a secret, permanent subsidy to the financial aristocracy. And the man who gave this system its legal shield? In 1999, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act repealed the Glass-Steagall Act, tearing down the wall between commercial and investment banking. But the final nail in the coffin was the Commodity Futures Modernization Act of 2000, CFMA, which, with the backing of people like then Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers and then Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan, specifically banned the regulation of OTC derivatives. The name is Phil Gramm, a powerful senator whose wife, Wendy Gramm, was the CFTC chair who had previously fought against regulating the derivatives that later caused the 2008 crisis. It was a perfect, incestuous financial coup. The cycle is complete. The Romans had their debased denarius. The French had their tax-exempt nobility and royal debts. We have the $600 trillion derivatives market, an untaxed, unregulated engine of wealth extraction that, when it inevitably fails, transfers its titanic losses onto the middle-class ledger. The stakes are astronomically higher now. Why? Because the modern system is faster and global. A crisis that took decades to unfold in Rome can now be triggered by a single keystroke in a London trading room and circle the globe in milliseconds. The next collapse won't be a slow decline. It will be a flash crash followed by a permanent tax increase. This entire mechanism relies on one philosophical lesson: denial. The empires of the past collapsed not because they ran out of resources, but because the productive citizens lost faith. They realized their institutions were built on borrowed time, a time bought with the false promise of solvency and the stolen labor of their own citizens. The middle class is the only class with enough power to pay the taxes, and the only class with enough education and organization to revolt. When the price of stability becomes the complete erosion of a productive life, the social contract is voided. Do not be the Roman farmer who abandoned his land. Do not be the French peasant who starved to pay the king's debts. Demand clarity. Demand accountability. This isn't about politics. It's about predatory finance. The tax trap is real. It is a feature, not a bug, of a system designed to launder sovereign insolvency by forcing you to pay the elite's gambling losses. If you found this truth unsettling, you're not alone. Like this video, hit subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to see the real balance sheet. Tell me in the comments, are we wiser now or walking the same path in better suits?